welcome. My name is Lexi Jong, and here I like to talk about luxury beauty. And today we have another episode of Makeup Mondays. And Makeup Mondays is where I provide information requested by you, the viewer. So today we are talking all about eye primers. What exactly are they supposed to do? Do you really need to use one? Is it okay to use concealer instead? And I'm gonna go through my favorites out of my collection. And I'd like to start off by saying that I was always somebody who did not like using primers. I didn't like using face primers or eye primers. I would occasionally use them, but it took me a really long time. And actually, I went through quite a few different samples and things before I found some that I thought actually made a difference. So now I am a strong believer in primers. And if you've watched my channel for a while, you know that my very favorite face primer is the Surratt Perfectionist primer. And that's because, I always wear sunscreen. And I think that this Surratt primer, basically cancels out any of the issues that you sometimes have layering sunscreen and makeup. So I absolutely love it. It also increases longevity. It gives me a really smooth base, and it's just very comfortable and lightweight on the skin. There are a lot of primers that have more of a heavy silicone feeling, which are ones that I typically don't enjoy, which is one of the reasons it took me so long to find a primer that I like, because a lot of the face primers have a heavy silicone content. And that has started to change recently. So now I have found a couple of primers I like. I like the Surratt Perfectionist primer. I've recently been enjoying the Victoria Beckham Cell Rejuvenating Priming Moisturizer when my skin's extra dry. So that's what I'm enjoying for the face. Now for eye primer, again, I really didn't see a purpose for having eye primer until I started playing around with more eyeshadows and things, thanks to starting this YouTube channel. And I have quickly become a convert. Now, eye primers are designed to provide a smooth base for your eyelids so that your eyeshadow application goes on evenly. And that's really important as your eyelids are maturing. So if you're starting to get wrinkles, so forth, like I have wrinkly eyelids, I always have, but as I've aged, they have become more wrinkly. So eye primer has actually become more important for me as I've gotten older, because it does help provide a smoother base, so that when I'm going to apply shadow, I don't have things accumulating in any fine lines and accentuating any of those fine lines when I'm done. Now, another reason that eye primers are so good is because it can extend the longevity of your eyeshadows. And again, with people with hooded eyes or people with oily lids, creasing can happen fairly quickly with an eyeshadow. So the primer is there to provide a barrier between your own natural oils and the actual product. So it's going to help prevent creasing and increase the longevity of your eyeshadow. Now, I have found that some primers work well for me for this and others really don't. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Another reason that you may consider using eye primer is because it helps keep your shadows in place. So when you are using something, for example, a shimmery shade or something creamy, again, it's going to help keep it in place to prevent creasing, but it also helps adhere that base to it so that you don't have as much fallout throughout the day. Now, for some shadows, some of those super shimmery, super glittery shadows and things like that, if you've got a lot of sparkle that will fall throughout the day and you're layering that on, once you get past that initial layer or so, the primer is not really going to help adhere that. For that, you would want something extra like a glitter glue or something like that. But for a regular eyeshadow, thin layers and so forth, the eye primer will help that adhere to your lid, stay in place, and help prevent fallout throughout the day. And yet we have another reason to use an eye primer. And with me, with my fair skin, a lot of times I don't really have too much issue with eyeshadows showing up on me, but occasionally I do, or use a sheer shadow so you can see like the veining in the eyelids, there are tinted eye primers. There are also clear eye primers, but there are tinted ones that you can use to kind of perfect the color of your eyelid to blend in. And they come in so many different colors. This is also very helpful whenever you're using a shadow that you want to get more pigment or more color from. So if something's just not really showing up as vibrantly as it does in the pan, a lot of times an eye primer can rectify that. So I think there are a lot of good reasons to use an eye primer. And yet a lot of people they'll go in with a concealer instead of an eye primer. Why is that not a great idea? Now, concealer, there are some concealers on the market that are promoted as being, you can use them on your eyelid as a primer as well. So I'm not talking specifically about those. I'm talking specifically about a regular concealer. So concealers oftentimes are going to have an oily or a slippery base to remain flexible on the skin to help, prevent any accentuation of fine lines and so forth if you're using it under the eye and so forth. But that slippery, oily base is not going to really help with your eyeshadows. So when you put that on, you can decrease the longevity of your eyeshadows because you've got, an increase in oil content than you would have without your concealer there. So that can promote creasing of the shadows a little bit sooner than it would have otherwise. It can also leave like a heavy feeling on your eyelids. I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty sensitive about what things feel like on my eyeshadow or on my eyelids. And so if I put like a regular concealer on my eyelids, I can feel that, especially like when opening and closing, you can feel that it's a little bit thicker. Most eye primers are going to be a thinner consistency than a typical concealer. And that heavy consistency can also make it a little bit more challenging to blend. And then again, as you are opening and closing your eyelids and so forth, things are going to kind of like transfer or adhere. By the way, that brings me up to one more reason to use eye primer. And I didn't know this. I actually saw this online this morning. I was just, confirming a little bit of my points here. And apparently when you use eye primer, if you are somebody with long lashes and your mascara, kind of hits your eyes, or you have mascara transfer throughout the day, using eye primer can actually help prevent that. Now, I'm not exactly sure how that works, but there are several makeup artists that say that that is definitely the case. So that would be another reason to use an eye primer. Now, typically eye primers were made without silicone as part of the ingredients because the silicone base can often be a little bit too slippery, and that's not going to help with any longevity of your shadows or prevent the creasing. So traditionally, eye primers had more of a tacky, grippy feel to them, and that's still true for many eye primers today. Now, I have to say, with all of the eye primers I've tried, there is no one perfect eye primer that checks off every single box. So I have found several that I like and that I use in different situations. So we'll be going through those. But I want to mention now that some eyeshadow primers have been including silicone in their ingredients now to help promote like a smoother base. But again, it all depends on how it's formulated. Some of the ones with this silicone base do not have that heavy silicone feeling to them like what I have experienced with face primers. So, you kind of have to kind of play around with different ones and see what you like and what your main goal is. Now, let's go ahead and go over the primers I have. Now, we're going to start off with this. This is actually from Supergoop, and it's a shimmer shade, and it's actually a creamy eyeshadow, but it also acts as an eye primer. So it has SPF 30, by the way, and you can actually put this on your lid as an eye primer and layer your shadow on top. You can use it all alone as a shadow, but it will actually provide a little grip for shadows as well and increases your longevity. I haven't had any issues with creasing with this, And I was actually surprised to find that this is also an eye primer, but during the summertime, I do like to use this as a base because it does have some SPF protection. So this particular shade that I have here is called First Light. Now, I wouldn't say this is the best eye primer, but again, if you are looking for something that doubles with SPF and you could even just use as a regular shadow as well, I think this is a really nice product. So it is something I like to use during the summer. Next up, I only have a small tube of this left at the moment. This is the Anastasia of Beverly Hills eye primer. And this is one that I used for a very long time. It comes in a couple sizes. This is the mini. They have a larger version as well. And mine is getting a little older, so it's a little bit more runny than it is when you get it fresh. So just so you know. But here is the Anastasia Beverly Hills primer. And whenever you apply eye primer, you can apply it with a brush on your eyes. You can apply it with your finger. I usually just use a finger, but you really just want the smallest, thinnest layer. So you really just want a tiny, tiny bit. So this is the Anastasia Beverly Hills primer. I'm just going to swatch all of these, and as they dry, then we'll go ahead and talk about the benefits of each one of these. Next up, we have the Viseart eye primer. And this one, again, this is going to be a clear one, so you can't actually see it. But it has more of a silicone texture to it. Then I have the NARS, this is the Smudge Proof Eyeshadow Base. This is the original shade, and they now have different colors of it as well. So if you'd like to get a tinted one, this is one you can have in this. So you can see this one comes with a wand, and so I'll usually just dab it on each of my eyelids and then use my fingers to spread it out, because again, you just really want a thin layer. And then the newest one in my collection is the Tom Ford Emotion Proof eyeliner or eyeshadow primer. And you can see that this one has more of a peachy pink look to it. So it does have a light tint. So I have these fully blended out just in portions, but other parts I have it built up so you can kind of see the color. So as I mentioned, this Supergoop Shimmer shade, I like this for summer, for easy eye looks and everything. But again, because of this color, you know, that's not something I'm going to use every day. Next up, we have the Anastasia Beverly Hills eye primer. And I really like this one. This is the one that, you know, before I started YouTube, when I was using eyeshadow primers, I used this one, and I would also use like the Urban Decay. I forget what that one's called. I would use those. The Anastasia Beverly Hills was the one that I preferred. So this, whenever I did use eye primer, this is what I used. But again, I wasn't a huge convert at that time for eyeshadow primer. One of the things I like about this is that it has a little bit of a thicker texture than some of the others. It's not thick and heavy feeling on your lids, but it is the thickest of all of these. And the reason I like that is because even though there's a slight tint, but it's not like super tinted or anything, it does actually kind of cover any lines and veins that I have. It also has a little bit of a tacky texture to it, so that it really works well with any of those shimmers or anything that you really don't want to budge. Now, because of that tacky texture, I do think application with this, for me at least, you know, it doesn't work as well to do like a blend with a dry powder. I actually prefer to pat on a layer of powder first before I go in with blending. So that's just something to note. And that's true with all tacky primers, not just this one. But this one in particular, because of that tacky texture, I find this one works really well with shimmery shadows. In particular, I like to use it with the Pat McGrath eyeshadows. So it's definitely one I like to keep around, and I really enjoy this one. And now that this part here is dry, I feel a little bit of tackiness still, but it's not sticky. While it's wet here, it's still a little tacky, or more tacky. So when you are using the primer, again, smallest amount possible, can use your ring finger to apply it. You just want to tap it on, or use a brush to blend it out. But you want a thin layer and you want to wait for it to dry before you apply any shadow, or you may have it adhering to more strongly in certain areas. So definitely let it dry. Next, we have the clear one from Viseart. And this is definitely a fantastic primer. So it does have a silicone texture to it. It's very thin, kind of like they call it a milky glass texture. And I just have to say that it's a very thin, not, it's not sticky like an ointment, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of like Neosporin coming out of the tube. And so but it does have a little bit of that silicone feeling, but yet when you put it on, it's very light, it's thin, and you don't really feel it. You don't feel it on your eyelids. Even when you go to touch it, they feel smooth, but you don't have that heavy silicone texture to it. So silicone's a component of it, but there is still a little tackiness to this one. So even though it's a silicone-based primer, I still feel tackiness here. So it does really work well with shimmers. It also works really well with mattes. Again, anytime I use an eye primer and there's some tackiness there, before I go ahead and, want to do like a soft blend, I like to have a light layer of powder there first to help, with the blending process. Just my personal preference there. But I think this one is probably the closest primer I have to checking all of the boxes, because it really works well with mattes. It increases the longevity of the eyeshadow. It works well with shimmers to kind of help keep them in place. And yeah, I really, really enjoy that one. That is my number one primer. So then moving on, we have the NARS eye primer, or actually, hold on. I skipped one, the Hourglass Veil Eye Primer. So let's add this one real quickly. We'll let this one dry. So we're gonna add this next to the Tom Ford. So you can see that this one is tinted. This one's gonna be more tan than the Tom Ford. The Tom Ford is a peachy pink. This one's really more of a soft beige. Okay, so we're gonna let that one sit, and then let's go back to the NARS eye primer. And so taking a look at the NARS primer, this one does have a tacky texture to it, just like the other two that I mentioned. I would say that this one and the Anastasia Beverly Hills are slightly tackier than the Viseart, and I really enjoy this one. So as I mentioned, the Anastasia Beverly Hills is one that I kind of always keep around, and I use it. I like to use it with the Pat McGrath shadows. It has slightly more grip than the other primers for the most part. The NARS comes closest to it. Now I have to say that I'm probably not repurchasing the Anastasia Beverly Hills, because I find that the NARS works almost just as well with the Pat McGrath shadows. But if I use the Anastasia Beverly Hills primer every day, my eyelids start to get a little dry, whereas with the NARS, I don't have that issue. So I do think that the Anastasia Beverly Hills has slightly more grip, works a little bit better with the shimmers, but because it is a little drying to my lids, the NARS beats that out. So the NARS one, again, I think is a great primer, and it's definitely one that I enjoy and use a lot. So definitely one of my favorites, and I will repurchase this as well. Moving on, we have the Tom Ford Emotion Proof Primer, and this is a silicone-based one. I don't really feel any tackiness with this one. It's not going to give you that silicone texture that you feel when you actually let it dry, but it is a very smoothing one, and it really does help kind of provide a very smooth base for eyeshadow application. And I think that in my case with my wrinkly lids, it really works well to not accentuate fine lines. So when I'm blending out matte eyeshadows, particularly the Tom Ford matte shadows, this is definitely one that I reach for. This peachy pink tint, I think, also provides a nice base. And again, the tint helps, hide any veins and lines and so forth that I have in my eyelids as well. So this is definitely one that I have been enjoying as well. And yeah, I really like this one. Now, for the one that I have forgotten, the Hourglass Veil Eye Primer, I like this one. And I was using this one all the time until I purchased the NARS. So the NARS actually beats this one out. There is the tiniest bit of tackiness to this, but it's very, very minimal. You do need to be careful not to use too much of this one. So you can see that this is kind of thick here. So you really just need to get like the tiniest bit. Like this is enough for both of my eyes. I'll just show you that. Can you see how much is actually on there? So what I would do is I would just go like this and then pat it on, spread it out. And that's plenty for my eyes. When I go in with too much eye primer, which is easy to do with this one, but this is true of going in with too much eye primer, pretty much of any of these, the tackiness, it's increased, but it never really truly dries down enough so that it's a little bit harder to get a smooth blend because of that tackiness, if that makes sense. So I really like this one. This one increases the longevity of my shadows. It doesn't have too much tackiness, so it doesn't really help as much with shimmers, but I find it very comfortable and moisturizing on the lids. It actually feels more like a moisturizer on my lids than it does an actual eye primer. So it's really comfortable to wear, and I can wear this safely every day without any dryness going on. So I really like this one, but I have since found better ones, but I'm not mad at this one at all. So let's go ahead and go over my rankings. Now I have to say the bottom of my list is going to be the Supergoop, and that's only because I find, it's really more of a niche product, and it can act as an eye primer, but it's not specifically an eye primer. So we're not really keeping this on the list, so I'll put it at the very bottom. So I like that one, again, for summer use in specific situations, but it's not going to be a daily use product with this type of color. And they do have other colors, but they're all going to be shimmery like that. So moving on, I have 5 additional eye primers. So number 5 is actually going to be the Anastasia Beverly Hills primer. And I do really like this. I love all 5 of the ones that I have. Other ones that I didn't like as much, I have since decluttered. So these are all things that I like, but this one is at the bottom of my list only because when I use it on a daily basis, my lids get a little bit dry, but it performs really, really well. So it's one that I will use for specific situations, but not on a daily basis. And again, as I mentioned, it works particularly well with shimmery shadows. Number 4 is the Hourglass Veil Eye Primer. And again, this one feels more like a moisturizer for the eyes. It's very comfortable to wear daily. It increases longevity a little bit, but it's not outstanding in that. And it's only, it doesn't really do anything special for the shimmer shades. There's not much tackiness to it, but it works really well as a base. And again, the tint helps kind of camouflage any lines and so forth. And you can get a really nice smooth blend on this, provided you don't use too much. This is number 4 on my list though, because it's really easy to get a little bit too much out from this tube. And I have just found others that I prefer over it, but I do really like it and I think it's a good purchase. Number 3 is the Tom Ford Emotion Proof Eye Primer. And I really like this one, particularly with the Tom Ford flat pan shadows. I think it really gives a nice smooth base for it. It really helps with, getting just like the perfect blend. And I like the tint on here. So I think it works really well for that. However, I don't notice any increased longevity with this. It doesn't, it's really more about giving a smooth base than it is about any other attributes you might have with an eye primer. So I really like it specifically for a smooth base, but if I'm looking for something to last a little bit longer, then I'm going to go with something else. So I do enjoy this one. but I like the NARS eye primer a little bit better. This is my number 2, and I think this is a great eyeshadow base. You know, it's comfortable to wear every day. I've got a little bit of tackiness in it. I like the fact that it comes in the original or the tints. I haven't tried the tints, and I know that, you know, looking at reviews and so forth online, you know, people have a strong preference for the original or the tinted, and I have heard that the original formula works a little bit better than the tinted version. I don't know if that's actually true. I thought they were supposed to be the same formula, just with added pigment. So if anybody can speak to that, please let me know down below in the comments. I'd love to hear more about that. So overall, this one's number 2 because I think it performs almost as well as the Anastasia Beverly Hills with, you know, shimmers and so forth, but it's more comfortable to wear on my eyes on a daily basis. My number 1 is the Viseart because I think this one is the most well-rounded out of all the eye primers. It feels very comfortable going on my lids. I have no issue getting anything out of the tube. You can see how much smaller this hole is compared to the Hourglass. And, you know, it's clear, so it's not, you know, that's the only thing. Sometimes I like to have a tinted primer to help provide a more vibrant base or mask any, you know, particular veins, but this one is clear, so it's not going to interfere with any shadow color. It is smooth, so you can blend out, you know, your shadows very well. It still has a slight tackiness to help with shimmers and so forth. This was designed specifically for Viseart products, but it works really well with other, you know, brands and so forth as well. So I would just have to say that this one is probably ticks off most of the boxes, and you know, definitely a great eye primer. So I hope this was helpful, and I would love to know what primers you have and use and whether or not you think eye primer is a necessity. I now have been, most days, I start my makeup routine with adding first my face primer, then my eye primer, and I kind of let everything set for a minute while I pick out what I'm planning on using. So I have really become a huge convert for eye and face primers, and I think they have really helped not only with application but longevity and appearance of the shadows and products in general. So again, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. If you have any questions or queries you would like to submit for Makeup Mondays, please be sure to leave them down below in the comment box. And I hope to see you guys very soon. Have a great day and stay safe and healthy.